Well, hello, welcome to module number 6. We are flying right through this course and hope that you continue to get some strategies from this course and from your colleagues that are helping you in your classrooms. It's been great to see the work that you're doing. And we are ready to jump into module 6. I thought I'd start with the devotion for this week. Just because, and I've shared this with you before, sometimes I feel like the devotions in this course, I read the scriptures and think that is exactly what I needed to hear. And so I thought this scripture from Galatians, let us not lose heart and grow weary and faint in acting nobly and doing right. For in due time and at the appointed season we shall reap. This was interesting to me. The question that you'll answer in your devotion this week in your assignment is, how do the tests that we face make us stronger, and how do we model courage and strength for our students? And that really kind of spoke to me this week, because here in my school district, we're about a week away from fall break, and I'm sure that you all know and have felt this too, that those couple of weeks prior to a break are just brutal. And I've certainly felt that and have felt myself growing weary. And so this was a good reminder to me that even when I'm weary and stressed and all of those things that hit us at certain times really hard in education, that I have to make sure that I'm modeling that strength. I don't work with students, but especially to the staff that I work with and the teachers and administrators that I work with, so that they can translate that to their students. I also thought it was interesting that this week, or this morning at my church, the pastor, his sermon today was on James 1, and it talked about that we should demonstrate joy when we're faced with challenges. And he referenced a scripture from James: dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. And I thought, between this scripture, because I had worked on this yesterday, and that scripture that my pastor spoke about this morning, clearly God is telling me that I need to work on experiencing joy and reflecting joy even when I'm stressed. So that spoke to me. I'm really interested to see how it spoke to you when you complete that assignment this week as well. So hopefully you can get something out of those scriptures, and that will help you get through this week and the challenges that you face. So with that, let's jump in. So this coming week, there are 3 videos, and I really like these videos and hope that you will as well. The first one is really kind of a throwback to week 1. If you think about when I think it was the first discussion post that you responded to was about what's the difference between data-driven and data-focused instruction, and he talks about that. And one of the things he talks about is that the data drives our decisions, but ultimately it's the teacher that has to make those decisions. And I really like how he framed how important that data can be, and some of the ways that he talks about data. He references starting a new school and how much data he collects, but really only 3 points out of 280 data points come from true tests. And so kind of that balance of formative assessment and summative assessment. I'll come back to John Hattie. Then the best practices and assessment is really focused at the secondary level. And so as particularly for those of you that teach at secondary, I thought that might be helpful for you. It talks about some student-led assessments and students tracking their own data and how that can look at the secondary level. And then John Hattie, Visible Learning and the Power of Feedback. That's a short video, about 4 minutes. But we're going to spend some time today giving you what I view as some of the highlights of Hattie and how important his work is when we think about assessment. So a few quotes from John Hattie. This is his book, Visible Learning. It is a great book. I haven't read it in a long time. And working on this module this week made me think, I think this is going to be some of my fall break reading, because I want to read it again. It's pretty dense. It is a meta-analysis, a summary of lots of different research, so it's not a light read. But he gives so much information that's so important for us as teachers. So things like what he calls, we need to provide dollops of feedback. information about how and why a child understands and misunderstands, what direction they must take to improve. Then he shares the incidence of feedback in the typical classroom is very low, usually in seconds at best per day. So how much feedback do our students receive in classrooms, in a typical classroom, out of their entire 7-hour day? Seconds of feedback. So that's where that really frequent formative assessment becomes so important to get students more feedback. He talks about that importance of goal setting and feedback so that students see the impact of goals and their progress towards goals. And then again, coming back to its teachers. So referencing the video that I talked about that you'll watch first, it's not just data. Data doesn't decide anything that we're going to do for kids. It's how teachers interpret that data and take action on that data that is so important. So I love listening to John Hattie speak. There are tons of different videos out there, and I'm sure you all are so involved in leadership in your buildings. This is probably not your first exposure to John Hattie, but I really wanted to challenge you to look at him through the lens of assessment, because he talks a lot about how important assessment is to learning. So some things that are important to know about feedback. One of the things at the bottom of the page down here from Hattie, most of the feedback that students receive about their classroom work is from other students, and much of that feedback is wrong. This number 7, students need to know their target, their goal. Having that goal setting piece is important. I love number 3, this isn't from Hattie, but the feedback students give teachers can be more powerful than the feedback teachers give students. Again, how is the assessment data that we're gathering giving us feedback about how we're teaching, what we need to do to help that student move forward. And then number 5, of course, speaks directly to formative feedback. Effective feedback occurs during the learning while there is still time to act on it. So several of you in your work have talked about examples of summative feedback. There's certainly a place for summative feedback, but the powerful feedback is that piece of data that we can use to impact learning while it's happening. So going back to Hattie, one of the things that you will find as you study, I keep having to move my picture around, sorry about that. One of the things that you will find in Hattie's work, Visible Learning, is he talks about the most effective strategies. And one of the things that he talks about is really everything in the green and yellow, which is things that most of us do or our schools do pretty regularly. Those things can all have a positive impact on learning. Just about everything we do as a teacher has a positive impact on learning. What Hattie looks at is what has the most impact. And so he really looks at those things with an effect size of 0.4 or greater as those that have significant impact on student learning. And so that's where we're going to spend our time. And I want to highlight for you just how many of the things that Hattie talks about speak directly to this course. So things like collective teacher efficacy. So many of you in your assignments have referenced PLCs, and we had a video last week about PLCs. That's what collective teacher efficacy is. That is teachers working together, supporting one another to improve their practice. That's what PLCs are all about, answering those 4 questions. Teachers supporting teachers is the most powerful strategy that we have at our disposal to impact student achievement. So that's why PLCs are so important, and I've been really pleased at how many of you are experiencing PLCs in your districts. Feedback, just simply receiving feedback, is of course critically important for our students. Self-reported grades. So this gets back to that goal setting piece and students looking at self-evaluating, self-assessing their work and setting goals as to what they want to do. So that will come up a little bit in the video that you will be watching. The other piece that I wanted to highlight here is classroom discussion. I didn't circle it, but classroom discussion. Several of you talked about that and have talked about it in your assignments, that's part of your formative assessment. Is you're working in small groups, you're having Socratic seminars, you're doing those kinds of things. That is a highly effective strategy to use with our kids, is to have those classroom discussions and to really get to what are our students understanding, and getting that in a one-on-one setting or small group setting or even whole group setting if it's structured effectively. And then we've also spent looking at response to intervention. That, of course, again, I didn't circle that, but that is driven by data as well. How are our students that are at risk performing? How are they responding to the interventions that we're putting in place? And then what supports do they need to keep moving? So many things. I circled 3. We just talked about 2 additional. So really 5 out of his most impactful strategies relate directly to student assessment. That's why this is so important. Here again, let me move my picture one more time. Just to give you an idea of, and he updates these periodically as he gets a new analysis, Hattie does, but you can see collective teacher efficacy, the highest effect size, self-reported grades, very high effect size, and again, that formative evaluation, classroom discussion, those are all really positive strategies that have a high impact on our students. So these are just, I wanted to just affirm the work that you're doing. This week you'll be spending some time in assignments talking about some different strategies that you will use for assessment tools. And I felt like Hattie's work tied in really well with that as you're thinking about what are those most effective strategies. How are you going to have some key assessment tools at your disposal? That's assignment 1. Assignment 2 is the devotional post that we talked about a little bit earlier, and then assignment 3 asks you to think about your final project in terms of how you're using technology to accommodate and differentiate. And you've shared a little bit with me about some technology strategies that you're working towards in your final paper, but this is really taking that different lens of accommodations and differentiation. And you've seen this before, but I just want to, since the assignment this week it relates to accommodations, where am I going to move myself? How about down here? Wanted to remind you of the difference between accommodations and modifications. So this was in a previous module, but since it comes up again in your assignment this week, anytime that we can put an accommodation in place, that is much better than a modification, because an accommodations means students are still working on that grade level content. They're still being exposed to the standards of their same age peers, their same classroom peers, versus a modification where you're changing what's being taught. So as you think about accommodations that you're putting in place this week, I just wanted to have this reminder for you as well, so that we're clear on definitions. That's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I look forward to seeing your work this week. Have a great one.